Hello and welcome. This is NTA Tuesday Live, and I'm Cyril Stober. The Chiefs of Defense Staff of the Economic Community of West African States recently held its 43rd ordinary meeting in Abuja. During the meeting, the chiefs reiterated their commitment to regional security, vowing to enhance peacekeeping and counter-terrorism efforts across the sub-region, with a pledge by the sub-regional bloc to activate a 5,000-man standby force to combat terrorism, and also a resolve towards addressing security challenges. Now, discussions during the meeting covered the deployment of the ECOWAS standby force, the consideration of an ECOWAS counter-terrorism brigade, and the strategic rotation of peace support officers. The meeting provided an opportunity to review the report of the last ECOWAS Committee of Chiefs of Naval Staff meeting and the presentation on the standardization of the table of equipment for the ECOWAS standby force. Tonight, NTA Tuesday Live will focus on regional and border security, the aftermath of the ECOWAS Chiefs of Defense Staff meeting. But before we go into the discussion, let's get to see this report put together by defense correspondent Ismail Musa.
Parts of the West African sub-region are challenged by border crime like proliferation of small and light weapons, banditry and terrorism. To combat these security threats, truncating socio-economic development in some critical parts of the African continent, ECOWAS Committee of Chiefs of Defense Staff activated a standby force to combat these security challenges in the sub-region. This was one of the major outcomes of the 43rd ordinary meeting of the ECOWAS Committee of Chiefs of Defense Staff held in Abuja, Nigeria.
We as stakeholders in the sub-region must identify and suitably adjust to the changing order of the global landscape in which emergent threats of terrorism, organized crime, climate change, cybercrime, and pandemics respects no boundaries. By leveraging our collective expertise, resources, and commitment, we can make a tangible impact on fostering peace, stability, and prosperity in the sub-region. In this regard, I am pleased to highlight the activation of the ECOWAS standby force to combat terrorism in the sub-region. The activation of this force underscores our collective determination to confront the scourge of terrorism with regards to insecurity and ensure the safety and security of our citizens. I am confident that our deliberation will be marked by a spirit of collaboration, innovation, and determination as we work towards crafting a comprehensive and sustainable strategy to address the security needs of the sub-region.
Modalities for the ECOWAS standby force deliberated at the forum include the review of pledges for the ECOWAS standby force and the counter-terrorism brigade.
As leaders of our respective armed forces, defense forces, we are aware that without a secure and conducive environment, economic growth and development will continue to elude our region. We must therefore support our political leadership by entrenching conducive and secure environment for economic development to thrive, recognizing that today's threats are not only complex and adaptive, they pervade and in cases transverse countries in the sub-region. We must therefore commend the foresight of our past leaders for setting up this platform to leverage for collective action against a common threat. Accordingly, the complexity of the security landscape demands that we leverage our collective expertise, intelligence assets, and coordinate our efforts towards borders if we must solve these challenges as the world has become a global village and the gap between us shrinking even more. Thus, collaboration is paramount and imperative to address both the root causes and symptoms of insecurity in our region. It is on this premise that the agenda for this meeting was carefully crafted to focus on critical areas while building from our previous engagements.
States have decided, that we should activate the standby force in this kinetic, that's a counter-terrorism force to deal with the menace, because the coastal countries are increasingly coming under threat from, the North Sahel side of the region. And we need to, come together with our armed forces and other things to have this brigade that will be a deterrent, to the southward drift of terrorism in our region. So this meeting is another step, in the drive toward the activation of the counter-terrorism force. We are soon going to have a meeting of ministers of finance and then the ministers of defense to decide on modalities to fund that. Because today, with the world as it is, we need to depend upon ourselves first before even trying to appeal to others for support.
Tuesday Live will be examining some of the resolutions of the ECOWAS Committee of Chiefs of Defense Staff. What is the state of the activated standby force, commitments by member states, and the current security situation in the West African sub-region? In Abuja, Ismail Musa, NTA News.
Well, that report sets the tone for tonight's discussion. Let's start off by introducing our guests. We'd like to welcome to this program Major General Emeka Onumajuru. He is Chief of Defense Operations. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you so very much. My pleasure to be here.
Right. We're also joined tonight, as a regular on this program, Mr. Mike Ejiofor, lawyer, security consultant, and the former director of the Department of State Services, DSS. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Right. And we are also joined tonight by Ambassador Oluremi Ajibewa. He's a political and security analyst and the former director of political affairs, ECOWAS. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Right. So let's get into the issues. Now, security remains a big challenge the world over, but we're narrowing it down now to a part of the world, and that's in West Africa. So let's start off by you assessing for us the state of security here, with an eye on terrorism, extremism, violent extremism, and the political instability in the region.
Thank you so very much. I think before I start, as always, I want to acknowledge our troops in the front line and thank them for the hard work they are doing in keeping our borders safe and ensuring that we are all safe. So I want to urge them to keep the flag flying very high and continue the good works. Now, the status of regional security, particularly within the West African sub-region, and indeed the Lake Chad Basin area, it's always good to look at the West African sub-region and the Lake Chad Basin together, because both sub-regional areas, the threats are intertwined. So the security is not as we would expect it to be, particularly when you go up towards the Sahel countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. They are facing serious extremist threats from Islamic State and also from JNIM. Now, how this affects us most is that this threat cascades down towards our own borders, towards the northern parts of Benin, towards the northern part of Togo, towards the northern part of Ghana. What it means is that the jihadis, there are this tendency that they are pushing towards the coastal parts of the country. And that in itself is a concern for the entire ECOWAS sub-region. Now, apart from terrorism, there's also other organized threats, smuggling of small arms and light weapons, illicit drugs, human trafficking. The import of this is that you have all these threats forming a criminal ecosystem. Criminal ecosystem in the sense that they fund each other. The terrorists are involved in gun running, the terrorists are involved in human smuggling, to also fund their extremist activities. So when you put all this in the same pot, you will now begin to understand the magnitude of the threat that we face. Now, if you go to the Lake Chad Basin, where we have Nigeria, Cameroon, and Chad, it's almost similar too, because these extremists are also domiciled in those areas, and from there they are also found into the country. I think in a nutshell, it can be better, but the threat of global jihadism going towards sub-Saharan Africa is very high. The Sahelian states, for instance, recorded the highest amount of kills in terms of terrorism-related incidents Last year, almost 51% of all terrorism-related incidents was in the Sahelian countries. So the statistics itself is also quite grim and gives everybody a cause for concern.
Well, all right, so we'll look into this in greater detail, but as you say, it's grim. But let's come to you, Mr. Mike Ejiofor. What do you make of all of this? It gives an impression of a sub-region that's on tenterhooks when it comes to security.
Well, it's quite concerning and disturbing what the jihadists especially are doing in the sub-region. It's not only the jihadists, you also, like the general said, talk about these terrorists, insurgents disturbing in the various countries. It's not peculiar to Nigeria. I think there was an attack 2 days ago in Burkina Faso, and you see pockets of these attacks in various countries, and there seems to be that coordination, between them, especially the ISIS, the affiliation with Boko Haram, and coming down from Sahel since after the fall of Libya, proliferation of arms, and it's really quite disturbing. But as we rightly observe, our security forces too are up to the challenge, but it can be better, and that is why when you introduce this issue of the meeting of the Chief of Defense Staff of the Soldiers, I think it's a step in the right direction in the fact that there will be this synergy and coordination among the various countries, because you cannot fight this in alone. It's quite challenging, and we must admit that.
Well, Dr. Jibewa, how much of a threat is all of this to the goals of regional integration which ECOWAS is pursuing? You can't sit back and talk about trade, integration, and general development when things like this are staring the region in the face, and it looks as if it's so tough to put down these threats to the security of the region.
Thanks so much. There's a nexus between peace, development, and security itself. And where there's no peace and insecurity, there will not be development there. And that's what the founding fathers realized after the ECOMOG and everything, Liberia, Sierra Leone, realizing that in the whole area there's been internal conflict. And what you tend to see right now is that the attention has been focusing on the need to ensure that the peace and security is in the region. Because having said that even the coastal states like Togo, like Republic of Benin, which Easter-while has not been affected, has now been. And when you look at the GDP, the gross domestic product, despite the fact that these are cocoa-producing areas like Ghana and others, and even in Nigeria per se, you tend to see that the farmer others, the farmers that are supposed to be on the farm, they are being attacked as well. This also affects the northern parts of most of the West African countries as well. When these kind of things happen, you realize that when the insecurity is at more, the government, the head of state, are diverting their attention to ensure peace and security. And as I've rightly said, it's not been well with the region with what we've been seeing, but nevertheless, the military personnel as well as the other forces are trying their best.
Within individual countries, their security operatives tend to be overwhelmed by the situation. But the coming together of forces from these countries as in joint operations, how solid is this in tackling this menace?
Okay, I think first I must make it very clear that your chances of effectively tackling transnational crimes is through bilateral and multilateral means. And the reason is simple, because when you have bilateral and multilateral arrangements, you sort of bring in more synergy into the operation. You sort of close the loopholes around the borders, because terrorists and organized crime make use of sanctuaries in each other countries, particularly when those countries are not working together. But once you have a bilateral and multilateral arrangement that gives the countries the power to either go on hot pursuit, to share intelligence, to conduct joint border drills, you have a much higher chances of success. If you look at multinational joint task force, for instance, made up of Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, and Benin as an observer status, that is one of the main framework that have been deployed in tackling Boko Haram threat in the northeast. And the reason is simple. Boko Haram activities transcend only Nigeria. They are in Chad, they are in Cameroon, and they move from one country to another. Their logistics source can come in from Cameroon to Nigeria or can come in from Chad or vice versa. But using the multinational joint task force gives you that synergy of efforts to address it. If you also go to the coastal countries, I'm sure you've heard about the Accra Initiative. Based on the sources to the multinational joint task force, Ghana, Benin, and Togo are also using the Accra Initiative, trying to establish a multinational joint task force. And even in the maritime area, of recent, a combined joint maritime task force with headquarters in Lagos, Nigeria, have been established to police the entire Gulf of Guinea. The whole idea is to bring all the capabilities of the countries into addressing this crime. So I think they are absolutely on the right track.
Let me just quickly come back to you, Ambassador Ajibewa. And, a lot of concern has been expressed following the cracks we've seen in the unity of ECOWAS, not the least the exit of some members, well, former, we can refer to them now. How will this impact the arrangement, the joint, effort towards putting down these insecurity situations?
Just like you've rightly said, it's very unfortunate because when a house is divided among itself, it's difficult to stand. The initial founding members and the founding fathers, ECOWAS used to be 16, then Mauritania went out, remaining 15. However, out of the 15 now, 4 are under military coup and then 3 AES states. It seems when you look at it from the political dimension, the cohesion, the unity is no more there, it's affected. Then when you look at the security part of it, we've been talking about multi, that is having arrangement within many countries. And when you look at Mano River Union there, you could see that it's between Guinea, Liberia, Sierra Leone. When you look at the multinational task force here, we've been working with Niger, we've been working, and all those ones could be used as an entry point by those so-called terrorists to come in. That's one. And then 3, we've been seeing that it's been a replacement of even France, now by Russia. So it means another form of international actors. It has another international dimension. And the biggest of all is that we tend to realize that there's the dialogue still going on. Then there's also back channel diplomacy still being on. But nevertheless, from all indication, as you've said, the loophole will cause both the socio-political, economic, as well as the military dimension, which cannot be quantified.
Mr. Ejiofor, this probably started on a small scale and it festered. It brings into question the level of intelligence gathering across board in these countries. And if there is that effective collaboration, in fact, at least in the past, if that has been of any significance in monitoring the activities of the terrorists who, in carrying out their activities, have now teamed up with other international terrorist blocs to carry out these attacks in West Africa.
Well, you see, this is where I think the National Intelligence Agency comes in collaboration with the State Security Service, because there must be this synergy between the domestic and international dimensions of the security threat. They say he who fails to plan plans to fail. We have this challenge, and like we have all agreed, it must be tackled. These countries that are under military government, now Burkina Faso, Mali, and the rest of them, that don't seem to give that necessary cooperation, but they're also suffering it. So there's need to use back channel, you know, if you isolate them like ECOWAS is doing, they are isolated. But I'm happy too that they are also cooperating through back channels, some of them coming out openly, for us to work together to see that this menace is checked. But I have a challenge, you know, in terms of funding of these multinational joint task force and the regional body. The burden definitely will be on Nigeria. And you know, we are not on that firm financial footing as the economy is going down. Our oil production, we have not met the target. The price of crude is below our expected benchmark. So these are challenges. So how do you now go about planning without sufficient fund? So that would be a big challenge. And I think the earlier the countries and the Chief of Defense Staff come to look at the source of funding. We are raising 5,000 strong force. How are you going to fund them? How are you going to pay? It's a problem.
Well, perhaps the General will take us through this 5,000-man standby force that the ECOWAS is proposing to combat terrorism. Let's get more on that.
Actually, the initial idea was to have a 5,000 strong force equipped with offensive platforms to be able to combat terrorism. But considering the resourcing, that is the financial challenges you just mentioned, the force was then scaled to 1,650 in the first instance. So the idea is to first equip the 1,650, and then from there you can now upgrade to the required or desired 5,000 strong force. The whole idea of the force is to be strong enough, I think that's the word, to be strong enough to counter terrorists and other extremist adversaries. Now the countries, ECOWAS countries, have been able to make pledges. Some have pledged, like Nigeria pledged a battalion among other platforms. Other countries have also pledged. So the pledges have been made. Now, apart from the pledges, the platforms that are required to support the pledges have also been met. But the actual fundings to pick the bills have been referred to the ministers of finance. They were supposed to sit and work out the modalities on how to fund this force. The whole idea is ECOWAS wants to be able to sustain this on its own in the first instance before looking at external support and fundings. Multinational Joint Task Force benefits from some external funding from the EU, partially, and also the member countries like Nigeria also foots the bill. But for this counter-terrorism fund, the idea is to first fund it within the ECOWAS, and then you can now look forward to getting external support. So that fund, then resolving the funding arrangement, is the key issue that is stopping it from taking off.
Well, already a number of tweets have been coming in regarding the matter that we're discussing here, and we'll just look at one or two of them and see from what dimension. This is Koliushu, I believe, has tweeted in to say, what are the main challenges facing border control in conflict-prone regions, and how can they be addressed through policy? We might want you to take on that.
Yeah, the border control. Actually, the issue of free movement is not the problem itself. Because those going there, they have the passport as well, and then there are some other. But the problem is what I would term, there are three concepts. One, what we call the unmanned spaces, unmanned spaces. Then there's what we call the porous borders, as well as the ungovernable spaces. Those are three concepts. But when you look at the border area, I'm happy to say where we have got it wrong in ECOWAS, I can say it here. The Chief of Staff Defense, I will state, when you are talking about the issue of regional security, you realize that the custom, as well as the immigration, they are the one actually manning borders. The military are expected to protect the territorial integrity, protection of the people, but when they have their meeting, most often, those people are not invited. Meanwhile, when you look at the nexus between border control, border stability, and regional stability, they are interlinked. So that is an area. So how do we do it? And he has rightly said, there's what we call joint border posts between AU and ECOWAS now, monitoring, sharing of information, Interpol, they are coming all together. Interpol as well as WAPCO, West Africa Police Committee. And there's also within the CDS and the Navy as well, they are sharing intelligence among the border, because not only the border where it's being passed by individual, but also on the sea. We have the Gulf there. As well, we realize that there are quite a lot of problems over there. So actually what we are trying to say is that there's a need for a concerted effort by all to make sure that the borders are manned. Those areas that are unmanned, they can use equipment to get there. But even if they have the command control room, most often there's a need for individuals to be there. But we don't have enough manpower to man those areas.
Now, speaking of the borders, there are concerns also raised about the communities, and this is reflected in the tweet from Obasi, in which he says, what role do communities along Nigeria's borders play in either aiding or hindering national and regional security efforts? I mean, these communities are scattered along the borders, and wondering what rule for them, because they could either be aiding the activities of terrorists, or be, act as a source of gathered intelligence to hinder the activities of terrorists.
Yeah, that's the
yes.
Okay, fine. You know, if you go to somewhere like Katsina State, bordering Niger and all this, you cannot differentiate who is a Nigerian and who is a Nigerian. They intermarry, they live together. In fact, you are aware that some of our even nationals live in Niger. So it becomes a problem, and because of that porous nature of and the cross-cultural affinity, it becomes a problem to check who is a Nigerian, who is a foreigner, who is coming into Nigeria. We have, borders, border control areas, but you have more of unmanned border areas. So that's where these people are coming from. And the terrorists on their part are aware of these illegal routes from which they come into the country with their arms. So we cannot rely on immigration and customs alone. There need to be jointness in operation by every agency, and in addition, we must deploy technology. That is the best way to go. Otherwise, we'll continue to go in circles and not making any progress.
There's a tweet here which would tie to the next issue, would ask the General to comment on, and this is from Tonika, who raises questions about the level or the effectiveness of Nigeria's collaboration with neighboring countries in securing the borders. How effective has this been? And of course, one of the, going back to one of the resolutions of the ECOWAS Chiefs of Defense Staff meeting here, was to form a counterterrorism brigade and the rotation of peace support officers. What's your view on this?
Yes, first, border security is a key part of the problems that we face in terms of regional security threats. And our view from defense headquarters, after so much capability gap analysis, is that we need to physically fence critical parts of the border area. It might sound well in terms of how massive the borders are, but it's doable.
Many citizens have raised that question and said there are countries that have, I mean, they do not have the resources that Nigeria has. And they do it.
That's the best. Countries like Pakistan that have the same challenges we have, they physically fence the borders. Now, when you fence the borders, you can now cover it with technology and cover it with fires. But if the borders are not fenced, the chances of maintaining security is very minimal. So that is something we really have to brace up to. Physical fencing of the border, starting from the most critical parts. So once that is done, it will give us much more leeway to improve the security situation. Now, in terms of bilateral arrangements, like I stated earlier, transnational crimes are best tackled, no matter what anybody tells you, through bilateral, multilateral means. So bilateral arrangements do work. I give an instance with multinational joint task force. It's been working up to the point that Niger left. In fact, before Niger left, they were one of our strongest allies within that multinational joint task force. And working close with them really helped.
Has this created a vacuum?
Of course, there is a vacuum. There is a gap because they have left. So what we are trying to do is to try to fill in these gaps by deploying more personnel, more resources. But then I also must point out that at the tactical level, we'll still cooperate. The commanders, they speak to each other in the field. But at the political strategic level, it looks like there's a delay. But at the operational level, there is no complete delay. We'll still talk. I will still exchange information and work together.
It takes us to the question of commitments by member countries. And like it has been observed, a lot of this might fall on Nigeria in the long run. But within these countries that make up this bloc, what is their political, strength and commitment to all of this beyond just... Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Just like the Commissioner of Political Affairs have rightly said, there's a need for he who dictates the tune dictates the pie. You could realize that with the action plan, they call it terrorist action plan, with regards to the funding, as you've read, the one for 2020 to 2024, it was 2 countries, Nigeria and Ghana, that paid before I left that time. But I learned now what they have asked them is to extend it to the end of 2025 to see whether others will pay. But however, what I tend to see is that even this issue of finance is still there. We have the troop contributing countries. As of now, even the ESF, as was rightly pointed out, is the member states that contribute, that pledges, and not that the standby forces are there. They are still pledging, either in terms of equipment or in terms of troops. But it is, the commitment has not been too much from some member countries. But nevertheless, I think with the tide of terrorism being seen now, it will make every member knows that nobody is exonerated. So the commitment, I think, has been increasing. One, in terms of West Africa compared to the other regional economic communities, we realize that what we call the community levy is there. Then we also have the fund, which they call the terrorist, the anti-terrorist fund, which is an action plan from 2020. But the pledges, some members have not. So the commitment, the political will needs to be there. Not only the political will, not only some of them should be conscious of the fact that the big brother, the hegemony, that used to pay all these bills is also having its own
grappling with so many internal struggles
struggle
itself, and coming out to bear the burden of the entire sub-region is not going to be easy.
Yeah.
But then there's also the question of trust among the countries itself, and that also played up quite recently. Knowing the true intentions of those who are committed to putting down this insecurity in the sub-region, and not for some countries believing that there is an ulterior motive or some form of agenda towards expansionism.
Well, somehow, to some extent, yeah, we'll look at it from that aspect. But, you know, in terms of commitment, we need to get our citizens involved. And the only way you can get them involved is through education, enlightenment of the people, patriotism. But when you bring up these issues, people will ask you, what is patriotism? Patriotism is love for one's country. Can somebody who is hungry, genuinely hungry, begin to love his country? People are, in fact, these criminalities, most of them are propelled by economic hardship. Ordinarily, some people are not, you have categories of criminals. Some of them are born criminals, there's nothing you do that will not make them go into crime. Some are circumstances that lead the people into criminality. So we need commitment from all the people. And for us to get that commitment, government has to discharge its responsibilities. There's no amount of armament, equipment we get in this country to fight this war that will make it succeed without providing the basic amenities. For instance, if we have a constant power supply, a lot of people go into small trade, you know, artisans. It will reduce this. So we need commitment, not only from the people, but from the government. Because the primary purpose of government is welfare and security of the people. But this is lacking. And I think the earlier you see, the problem we're facing in this country, now, instead of talking of governance, people are already jostling for 2027. It's not right. Our politicians should learn that if we don't have a country, there's nowhere for them to practice their politics. So it goes beyond the country. We're talking of regional security now. But you must secure your own country before you start talking of getting other people involved.
General, let me ask this. You might be very conversant with the capabilities of, let's say, individual countries who are members, for instance, Nigeria. But across board, from all the meetings and the discussions which you've been involved in, do we seriously have a capable and, how do I put it this time, armed forces across the sub-region that are capable? It's been said that there was a time when the bulk of those who carried out international operations were drawn from African states. But the various challenges and the political upheavals and instability in these countries have led to their armed forces being less than effective as they were. Do you see that?
Well, I think the capability of armed forces within the sub-region, it is still good. The capability is there. Maybe we can look at more in terms of the resources available vis-a-vis the overall resources available to these countries. Of course, definitely the 100% of a nation's resources wouldn't go to the armed forces. There are also critical areas, socio-economic areas that need to benefit from the resources. But the basics are there, I can assure you. Now, if you look at the ECOWAS standby force, don't forget that they are successfully conducting operation in Gambia. They are successfully conducting operations in Guinea-Bissau. They have successfully opened a logistic base in Sierra Leone. These have all been success stories. Without the ECOWAS standby force operations in Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Sierra Leone to an extent, we don't have the level of peace and stability you have in those countries. So I think the armed forces are capable, but then the challenges are also enormous. When you match the challenges against what is available, you find that it's difficult to get the correct balance. So that is the problem. So what needs to be done is for them to keep on improving their capabilities, and rather than work in silos, should be able to work through bilateral and multilateral arrangements. And I guess that is the main reason why ECOWAS feels they need a counter-terrorism force, rather than depending on an individual country to address the problem by themselves. But the trust element you mentioned is real. I can assure you it's real. It's real in terms of the modus operandi of this force. I remember the earlier discussions, the question was, how would the force operate? Where would they be domiciled? You know, it provided a complex situation to which at the end of the day we were able to reach an agreement that yes, this force is necessary. But that trust element is important. And for now, for various reasons, it's still work in progress. We still need to do more to ensure that everybody is fully on board.
Dr. Ajibewa, you consult on policies, strategic issues here. And you have the advantage of being in ECOWAS. I haven't been in ECOWAS for quite a while. And here I want us to go back to the political terrain and see just how much work needs to be done by these countries politically, apart from just a will to carry out governance the way it should be. What about the systems? The political stability of this region has always, all the time been, especially when it comes to governance issues. And how much of this results in criminalities across board and even, insurgency as well?
Thanks so much. That leads to what we policy analysts and academia has now said: democracy without development is like a sham. And that seems to be one of the debates going on now, that when you compare countries like Singapore, Malaysia, and that are a bit autocratic, when you compare to countries in West Africa that are a bit with some level of democracy, you tend to see that the standard of living and the GDP in those areas are far more. And that also brings home what we are saying. The trust of the people is no more even in the elections. When you look at the voters' turnout, it's coming down in West Africa. Having worked 18 years in ECOWAS, and I've gone around on the elections, and I see the level of voter apathy is highly increasing, given the fact that they believe what has been the dividend of democracy. That's one. Secondly, the issue of unconstitutional change of government. We have some leaders, because you've said it there, who don't want to open the Pandora box. That is to say, you don't want to blame your colleagues. We have problem right now in Côte d'Ivoire, in Guinea-Bissau. I don't want to go into the epistemology, but you know, elections supposed to have been held in those countries. And then there's some people, October, and they are looking at it that is so oppositions are being clamped. So the civil space is even frozen. So whereas West Africa has been an epicenter of democracy, where you look at Ghana, Nigeria, and a few member states like Cape Verde. But what we tend to see right now is that the people don't believe in the voting pattern. They believe like it's a sham. The trust is no more there, given the fact that they believe the dividend of democracy is not seen.
Well, we have a few minutes left on this part of it, and perhaps we'll begin to look at what strategies should be adopted in line with what the chiefs of defense discussed at their meeting, and extending it further, what the individual countries should bring to the table in order to make this work. Otherwise, meetings would be held, there would be agreements and signed commitments which are not followed through.
Yeah, so you need to be followed through. Meetings without concrete decisions is of no effect. So, first of all, they must be able to address the issue of funding. It's very critical. Because if you don't have the fund, no matter how laudable your programs are, it's not going to take off the ground. So we need to get the fund, and the funds are not even available. That's the major problem. The funds are not available. Then, like the ambassador said, there must be this transparency on part of government, so that people will have confidence in government and assist in providing information, which is of course converted to intelligence. It's not only peculiar to Nigeria, the West African sub-region. Why did some people overthrow government? The electoral process needs to be transparent, so that the people will be held, our leaders will be held accountable. If you don't do well, next election, you are voted out. But a situation where people think you write result and say go to court, it promotes, that indifference and lack of confidence in governance. And everybody says, after all, what's our business? What's the dividend of democracy that we are going to get? But if all the people are involved, like we talk about first line of defense, I continue to maintain and insist that we must secure our country first. And how do we secure our country? The people must be involved. That first line of defense. Let us get ourselves organized in our communities, because there's no area now that is even safe. You go to Northeast, they have their own challenges. You go to Northwest, they have kidnapping. You go to South, kidnapping. And all these things are boiling down that people don't go to farm. Very soon we'll still go into farming. And there won't be food for anybody to eat. And the fight will be intensified against the citizens. So it's quite disturbing. The government needs to address all these issues.
Not just Nigeria here. Are the armed forces stretched thin? Here I'm not referring to just Nigeria. Along this block, these are West African countries where their armed forces are unfortunately engaged in the fight against things that we're discussing here? Are they stretched thin with these terrorists garnering international support from terrorist cells and with their being exposed to more sophisticated patterns? Are we stretched thin?
Well, I think the answer is the armed forces are stretched, but maybe not thin. They are stretched. If you look at the Sahelian countries, for instance, Burkina Faso, about 40 to 50% of its territory is now within government control. Is that bad? The same thing is not, it's almost the same thing in Mali and the same thing in Niger. So those three countries are really challenged. But like I've stated earlier, the best strategy to address regional security threats is through multilateral means. And so ECOWAS counterterrorism force is like putting our best foot forward. So what needs to be done is for the ministers of finance, which are working on it, to be able to find that funding modality that is acceptable to all, to be able to fund the ECOWAS counterterrorism funds and maybe also fund the combined maritime joint task force. Now, apart from the multilateral means, ECOWAS countries also need to, through bilateral means, should be able to engage each other towards solving the problems. In that regard, Niger will share our longest border with Niger. So we still believe that, irrespective of whether Niger is no more part of ECOWAS, we need some form of bilateral arrangements that allows us to cooperate in the field in terms of tackling challenges that affects both countries. And other ECOWAS countries too are also doing that, because it was one of the resolutions in the ECOWAS Chiefs of Defense Staff meeting that countries should continue to engage. Do not delay, continue to engage with your neighboring countries, because the challenges are best addressed through bilateral and multilateral means.
Well, in keeping with Mr. Jeffor's suggestion about the communities, the peoples themselves of this region, what to do, what's the kind of support and cooperation that you'd be expecting from West African peoples as their armed forces go out there to secure their borders and the region?
Securing the borders, I think I will still fall back on our physical fencing. Yes, of late we've come to that realization after some deep comparative analysis of other countries that have the same problem, that we cannot run away from physically fencing the critical parts of our borders. And then when you do that, you can now use technology to cover some other parts. That's one of the best things we can do.
Ambassador, back to the people who want to have a safe and secure region.
Yeah, I think one thing is that all encompassing the civil society should be involved, which is some of the things being discussed, because when you look at it, the civil society cut across, and they've done some very good work, even in Burkina Faso, even in Nigeria. We know the history of pro-democracy. After that, we have organizations like Center for Democracy. Some of the issue is that when what we call the institutions, like the electoral system, INEC, human rights organizations, as well as the vibrant media as well are in the country, they will be able to bring out constructive criticism of both even the military as well as the government. But what we tend to see is that most often it's being left for the regional organizations to help them to achieve this. And what regional organizations tend to see is what they call the fait accompli. The problem has already arisen because of the state capture. The executive arm will have already used the power of their domination to capture, which is what is there, jurisdiction of the election. Everybody knows that election now, even if you don't win, you have to go to court. and it takes a process. So when you see the civil society in each of the countries, we have a lot of them here, they can take it up and they make sure they challenge the system.
Eyes will be on the ministers of finance.
Yeah.
They are the ones who will provide the backing for the concerns that have been raised here about funding of these forces. But then again, the ministers are in themselves politicians.
You see, like what General said, in sane society, in civilized society, would have been the best option. But for us to embark on fencing our borders, then we must provide necessary funds. It's not, that is, it must be concrete walls with some measure of dimension.
At least in the most critical places.
Otherwise, they will go and blow up the fence as it is. So we need to, that's the only way, so that we can man our borders. Those critical areas like Niger, but you know it's quite extensive. Border Niger, Lake Chad, and Cameroon, all those areas from which these people come in. But I think it's worth considering by government if the funds are available.
All right, well, we'll have to leave the conversation here and hope that with the next meeting, and as the ministers of finance commit to raising the funding for this standby force, and a huge step would have been taken towards solving the security problems of the region. But we have to leave this conversation here at this time and thank our guests very much for having been part of it. Major General Emeka Onumajuru, Chief of Defense Operations. Thank you
so very much.
Mr. Michael Joffa, always a pleasure to have you join us in these
pleasure.
conversations. And Ambassador Oluremi Ajibewa, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right. Up ahead, we'll return to the matter of reserved seats. And this is talking about gender equality in the various legislatures. So stay with us on NTA Tuesday Live. We'll be back shortly.